On January 24th, 2026, Ukraine awoke to a chilling contradiction, one that would define the day and echo the ongoing struggle of a nation at war. As the first light crept over the snow-covered streets of Kyiv, the city braced itself for another day of uncertainty, caught between the hope for peace and the harsh reality of conflict. Across the continent, far from the front lines, diplomats gathered in a grand conference center, their faces set with determination and fatigue. The world's attention turned to these peace talks, held in the hopes of forging a path out of violence and toward a lasting resolution. Yet even as negotiations began, Russian missiles rained down on Ukrainian cities. The thunder of explosions echoed through residential neighborhoods, shattering windows and sending plumes of smoke into the icy air. For many, the promise of diplomacy felt distant, drowned out by the relentless sounds of war. The timing of these attacks, coinciding with the high-stakes negotiations in Abu Dhabi, was no accident. It sent a chilling message to the world. Moscow was willing to use violence as a bargaining chip, leveraging fear and destruction to influence the outcome of the talks. Inside the negotiation rooms, tension was palpable. Diplomats exchanged uneasy glances, aware that every word spoken was shadowed by the violence unfolding back home. The very foundation of the peace process was being tested, as trust and hope wavered with each new report of devastation. For ordinary Ukrainians, the day was marked by anxiety and fear. Families huddled in subway shelters, glued to their phones for updates, while children clung to parents as air raid sirens wailed overhead. The dream of diplomacy was overshadowed by the immediate need to survive. Air raid sirens pierced the cold morning, and sudden explosions shattered any sense of normalcy. Streets emptied in seconds as people scrambled for safety, their daily routines upended by the ever-present threat of attack. Around the globe, news outlets broadcast the stark contrast between the calm, orderly negotiations and the chaos of destruction. The world watched, transfixed, as the immense difficulty of seeking peace while violence persisted became painfully clear. This day became a microcosm of the entire conflict, a battle fought not only with words and promises, but with weapons and fear. Diplomats and soldiers alike found themselves on the front lines, each playing a role in a struggle that blurred the lines between dialogue and defense. As Ukraine and its allies navigated this treacherous path, they faced a sobering reality. The journey toward peace would be long and fraught with peril, demanding resilience, unity, and unwavering resolve in the face of relentless adversity. In Kyiv, the overnight missile barrage brought terror and tragedy. One person was killed, 4 more were wounded, and thousands of residents suddenly found themselves trapped in freezing homes as the city's energy infrastructure was deliberately targeted. The attack was swift and merciless, shattering the fragile sense of safety that had settled over the city in recent days. For many, the night was spent huddled in darkness, listening to the distant echoes of explosions and the wailing of sirens, unsure if the next strike would hit their own building. 6,000 buildings lost heat overnight, plunging families into a life-threatening crisis amid sub-zero temperatures. Parents bundled their children in every available blanket, desperate to keep them warm as the temperature inside their homes dropped dangerously low. Elderly residents, already vulnerable, faced the terrifying prospect of surviving the night without heat or electricity. The city's once bustling neighborhoods became eerily silent, save for the sound of wind whistling through broken windows and the distant hum of generators. The attack was a calculated effort to weaponize winter itself, aiming to break civilian morale by turning daily survival into a relentless struggle. With power lines down and water supplies disrupted, people queued in the snow for basic necessities: water, food, and fuel. Emergency crews worked around the clock, braving the bitter cold to restore essential services, but the scale of destruction made recovery painfully slow. Residents bundled in layers seeking warmth wherever possible, crowding into makeshift shelters, gathering around portable heaters, or relying on the kindness of neighbors. City services, already stretched thin, struggled to keep up with the overwhelming demand for aid. Volunteers distributed blankets and firewood, while local officials coordinated emergency relief efforts, determined to prevent further loss of life. The psychological toll was immense. Each new strike reopened old wounds and deepened the city's collective trauma. Children clung to their parents in dark basements, haunted by memories of past attacks. Adults stared out shattered windows, their faces etched with anxiety and exhaustion, wondering how much more they could endure. The sense of uncertainty was overwhelming, as no one knew when the next attack might come. Yet even in the face of relentless aggression, Kyiv's people endured. Their resilience became a quiet act of defiance, a refusal to be broken by fear or hardship. Neighbors helped one another clear snow, shared scarce resources, and offered words of comfort and hope. Volunteers braved the frozen streets to deliver supplies, embodying the city's unbreakable spirit. Their determination to survive and resist remains unbroken, even as the war turns homes into battlegrounds. In the frozen streets of Kyiv, the human cost is measured not just in lives lost or buildings destroyed, but in the extraordinary courage and solidarity of a city refusing to surrender. In Kharkiv, the night's assault injured 19 civilians and struck at the heart of the city's most vulnerable. A maternity hospital and a hostel for displaced people were among the targets, highlighting the indiscriminate nature of the attacks. First responders worked through the chaos, saving lives amid scenes of devastation. The targeting of a place of birth and a shelter for the displaced was a chilling violation of humanitarian norms meant to terrorize and demoralize. Yet, Kharkiv's residents, hardened by years of conflict, responded with resolve, caring for each other and refusing to yield. The attacks aimed to break their spirit, but instead, they strengthened the city's determination to endure and rebuild. Far from Ukraine's war-torn cities, Abu Dhabi hosted landmark peace talks between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. The goal, to find a path to end the war, with issues ranging from ceasefires to territorial disputes on the table. Early progress was fragile, limited to minor agreements like humanitarian corridors. But as Russian missiles struck Ukraine during the talks, hopes for diplomacy were shaken, casting doubt on Moscow's intentions. The violence threatened to derail negotiations, making it nearly impossible for Ukraine to trust in the process while its people suffered. At the heart of the negotiations stood Ukraine's delegation, led by Rustem Umerov, a Crimean Tatar and seasoned negotiator whose very presence symbolized Ukraine's unwavering commitment to its sovereignty, including the contested region of Crimea. Umerov, known for his diplomatic acumen and deep personal connection to the issues at stake, brought both determination and empathy to the table. The Ukrainian team was a diverse group of officials, each representing different facets of the nation's political and cultural landscape, united by a single goal: to secure a future free from foreign domination and to restore territorial integrity. Their approach was shaped by the trauma of recent conflict and the hope for a peaceful resolution. Across the table, Russia's delegation, directed by the Kremlin's highest authorities, arrived with a clear and uncompromising agenda. Their demands centered on international recognition of territories occupied since 2014, as well as ironclad security guarantees to prevent further NATO expansion near Russian borders. The Russian negotiators, experienced in the art of power politics, projected an image of strength and resolve, seeking to leverage their military presence on the ground as a bargaining chip. Their strategy was to extract maximum concessions while maintaining a firm grip on the territories in question. The United States, meanwhile, played a pivotal dual role, acting as both mediator and Ukraine's principal ally. American diplomats, well-versed in international crisis management, were determined to prevent any settlement that would compromise Ukrainian sovereignty or embolden further aggression. Their presence signaled to all parties that the outcome of these talks would have far-reaching implications for the global order and the credibility of Western alliances. The trilateral format of the negotiations, bringing together Ukraine, Russia, and the United States, acknowledged a crucial reality. Any lasting peace would require not only direct dialogue between the primary adversaries, but also the involvement of global powers capable of guaranteeing broader security arrangements. This structure reflected the complexity of the conflict and the interconnected interests of multiple nations. Tensions ran high throughout the talks. Ukraine negotiated from a position of moral authority, drawing on international sympathy and legal principles. But it was also acutely aware of its reliance on Western support, both diplomatic and military. The stakes were existential, and every word exchange carried the weight of lives and futures at risk. Russia, for its part, projected strength not only through its words, but also through the ever-present threat of military escalation. The show of force was a constant backdrop, reminding all participants of the high costs of failure and the Kremlin's willingness to use hard power to achieve its aims. The Americans faced a delicate balancing act, providing steadfast support for Ukraine while working tirelessly to prevent the conflict from spiraling into a wider regional or even global confrontation. Their diplomatic efforts extended beyond the negotiation room, coordinating closely with European allies and signaling unity in the face of aggression. Ultimately, the outcome of these high-stakes negotiations hinged on whether these key players, each with their own interests, histories, and visions for the future, could find common ground and bridge their deep divides. The world watched, knowing that the decisions made here would shape the fate of a nation and the stability of an entire region. In response to the missile attacks, Ukraine's leaders condemned Russia's actions as deliberate sabotage of the peace process. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha called the strikes brutal and barbaric, insisting they targeted not just civilians, but the negotiations themselves. President Zelensky highlighted Russia's strategy of weaponizing winter, framing the attacks as state-sponsored terror. Ukraine's message to the world was clear. Peace cannot be achieved through intimidation or at the expense of justice. Sybiha went further, declaring Putin belonged at a tribunal, not at the negotiating table. This defiant stance rallied international support and underscored Ukraine's refusal to accept a peace dictated by violence. For Ukraine, any resolution must begin with an end to aggression and accountability for those responsible. The core obstacle in Abu Dhabi was territory. Russia occupies about a fifth of Ukraine, including Crimea and parts of the east and south. For Moscow, holding these lands is non-negotiable. For Ukraine, restoring its borders is a matter of national survival. This fundamental clash leaves little room for compromise, making progress on other issues possible but ultimately secondary. Russia's attacks during talks reinforced its position, using force to assert control over occupied regions. While some diplomats speculate about creative solutions, Ukraine insists only full restoration of its borders is acceptable. Until this central issue is resolved, true peace remains out of reach. Adding to the diplomatic drama, U.S. President Donald Trump invited Vladimir Putin to join his Board of Peace, a personal initiative to end global conflicts. The move sparked controversy. Supporters called it bold. Critics feared it would legitimize Putin and undermine Western unity. The Kremlin's silence on the invitation fueled speculation about Russia's intentions. For Ukraine, the idea of Putin being welcomed as a peacemaker while waging war was deeply unsettling. Kyiv worried the U.S. might pursue a separate deal, risking Ukrainian interests for diplomatic optics. The episode highlighted the unpredictability of global politics and the anxieties facing Ukraine. As alliances shift, Ukraine must navigate an uncertain international landscape. January 24, 2026, captured Ukraine's paradox pursuing peace while enduring relentless war. The outcome of this conflict will shape the global order. If aggression prevails, it sets a dangerous precedent for the world. For Ukrainians, the fight is existential. For their land, culture, and right to choose their future, the cost is staggering. Lives lost, cities shattered, trauma that will last generations. Yet Ukraine's spirit remains unbroken, unity forged in adversity. The unresolved territorial dispute is the greatest barrier to peace, with neither side willing to yield. As the world watches, Ukraine's struggle is a fight for justice, sovereignty, and the hope that peace can mean more than just the absence of war.